I didn't know when the night started, only that it arrived without asking. It crept in slow, settling over the land the way dust settles on old furniture, quiet, patient, certain it would be there a while. The sky dimmed until colors lost their names, until everything became a version of itself rather than the thing it once was. I walked beside the rails, boots scuffing gravel, coat pulling at my shoulders with every step. The air had that late evening chill to it, not cold yet, but sharp enough to make you aware of your own breathing. There's a sound the world makes right before night takes hold. It isn't silence. It's more like the absence of urgency. Birds stop arguing with each other. The wind stops rushing. Even the ground feels like it's listening. I've learned to listen too. The rails stretched forward, twin lines disappearing into a dark that hadn't made up its mind yet. I followed them because they were there, because they always are. I used to think roads were invitations, that they offered something new, something better. Now I think they're more like mirrors. They don't give you answers. They show you what you carry when everything else falls away. I hadn't always been alone. That's the part people get wrong. They see a man walking by himself and assume he was built that way. But nobody starts out wanting to be alone. It happens slowly. First, you lose the rhythm of your old life. Then the reasons you used to wake up stop feeling heavy enough to pull you out of bed. Then one morning, you realize you've been standing still for so long that moving feels like the only honest thing left to do. I stepped off the packed dirt and onto the gravel, letting the sound of my boots fill the quiet. The tracks hummed faintly underfoot, like they remembered every train that had ever passed over them. I wondered how many men had walked this same stretch, thinking the same thoughts. How many had believed they were the first to feel this lost, this tired, this awake. The world has a way of humbling that kind of thinking. The sound of the train grew heavier as it came closer, not louder, just fuller, like the earth itself was remembering something it had tried to forget. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening to the rhythm of it roll somewhere beyond the bend until it settled into my bones. There's a weight to that sound, a promise and a warning tangled together. That's when I saw the glow, not the harsh beam of a headlight, not the clean cut of a signal lamp. This was softer, warmer, a fire that wasn't meant to be seen from far away. I followed it slow, kept my steps light. You don't walk into another man's space without care. Fire can mean comfort, but it can also mean claim. The air smelled of old wood and rust. Night was settling in now, pulling the color out of the world one shade at a time. Somewhere behind me, the rails hummed like they were remembering every train that had ever passed. I felt it before I saw him. That sense you get when someone else is close enough to hear your breathing. He sat with his knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight around himself. The fire was small, barely holding on, but he stayed close to it like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He didn't look up when I stopped a few steps away, but he knew I was there. You don't survive long out here without learning that kind of awareness. "Evening," I said. No answer. I waited. After a moment, he tilted his head just enough for the firelight to catch his face. Young. Too young. The kind of tired that settles in deeper than sleep can fix. "I'm not here to take anything," I said. That earned me a small nod. I crouched down across from him, careful not to crowd his space. The fire cracked softly between us. "Name?" I asked. He hesitated. Eddie. Stitch. He studied me, weighing the name like it might tell him something useful. You riding? He asked. Sometimes. That seemed to satisfy him. The wind shifted, and he shivered. I reached into my coat and pulled out the last of my bread, breaking it in half and setting it between us. He stared at it for a moment, then took it slowly, like it might vanish if he moved too fast. Watching him eat did something to me, brought back a version of myself I hadn't thought about in a long time. How long you been out here? I asked. Couple weeks, he said, then quieter, maybe more. The fire popped. You got somewhere you're headed? He shook his head. West, I guess. That answer held more hope than sense. The ground began to hum beneath us. Not loud yet, just enough to feel through the soles of your boots. The train was coming. Eddie stood up too fast and swayed. I reached out without thinking and caught his arm. I'm fine, he said, but his voice wobbled. You're not ready, I said. He pulled free. I have to be. The light from the engine touched the clouds now, pale and distant. The rails sang beneath our feet. You don't have to do this tonight, I said. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. That look people get when staying feels heavier than risking everything. If I don't go now, he said, I never will. The wind picked up, carrying grit and heat from the approaching train. I knew that feeling, knew it too well, the kind that convinces you motion is the same thing as escape. I reached for him again, slower this time, and in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. That some nights don't care what you want to save. They only care what you're willing to lose. The sound changed first. It deepened, thickened. What had once been a low hum became a pressure in the air, a weight pressing against my chest. The ground beneath our boots began to tremble, not violently, just enough to remind us that something large and unstoppable was on its way. The wind shifted, warm now, carrying the smell of oil and iron. Eddie leaned forward like he was being pulled by it. Easy, I said, reaching out again. He didn't pull away this time, but he didn't look at me either. His eyes were locked on the glow ahead, bright and steady, like it held answers he'd been waiting for. I can make it, he said. I know I can. I'd heard that tone before, heard it in my own voice years back, when I thought willpower could bend the world into something kinder. You don't know that, I said. I have to try. The wind picked up, snapping at our coats. Dust swirled around our boots, stinging our eyes. The rails sang now, a high, vibrating note that ran straight through bone and memory. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. It's not about wanting it bad enough. That train doesn't care what you want. He swallowed. Neither does anything else. That stopped me. For a moment, all I could see was myself at his age, thinner, hungrier, burning with the same need to move, to outrun the ache of staying put. I remembered the night I'd made my own choice, how no one had stopped me, how part of me had always wondered what might have happened if someone had. The engine's light cut wider now, stretching shadows across the gravel. The world narrowed to noise and motion and breath. Eddie took a step toward the tracks. I grabbed his arm. He jerked back, startled. Let go. You're not ready, I said again, louder now. You miss your footing out there and that's it. He shook his head, panic flashing across his face. You don't get it. I can't stay. There's nothing for me back there. There's nothing for you under a train either, I said. The ground shook harder now. The train was almost on us. The headlight burned white-hot, washing the world in harsh light. He tried to pull free again, desperation giving him strength. I can do this. I have to. I held on, heart pounding. You don't have to prove anything tonight. For a moment, everything balanced on that space between us. The pull of motion against the weight of staying. And then the train screamed past. Wind slammed into us, violent and sudden. I lost my footing, boots sliding on gravel as metal thundered inches away. I tightened my grip and yanked him back just as a gust tore through the space where he'd been standing. The sound swallowed everything. Steel roared, air ripped past. The world became noise and force and chaos. I dropped to one knee, dragging him down with me, pressing him to the ground as the cars thundered by. Dust and grit filled my mouth. The night shook like it might split apart. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The train vanished into the dark, leaving only wind and ringing silence behind. The world settled slowly, like it was remembering how to breathe. Eddie lay there, chest heaving, eyes wide. I kept my hand on his shoulder until his shaking eased. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were wet. Not with tears, but with something close. He started. Yeah, I said. You did. The tracks were quiet again. Too quiet. Like nothing had happened at all. Eddie pushed himself up, sitting in the dirt, staring at the place where the train had been. I thought it would take me somewhere. Sometimes it does, I said. Sometimes it just takes. He nodded slowly. The night wrapped back around us, heavy and still. The fire we left behind had burned low, just a few coals glowing in the dark. I stood and offered him my hand. Come on, I said. Let's get you warm. He hesitated, then took it. As we walked back toward the dying fire, I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief, not fear. Something quieter. A responsibility. Because once you stop someone from falling, you don't get to pretend you didn't see them anymore. And I knew, deep down, that this night had changed the shape of both our roads. The world didn't rush back all at once. It returned in pieces, the crackle of dying embers, the whisper of wind through dry grass, the faint ringing in my ears left behind by the passing train. Everything felt slower now, like the night itself was catching its breath. Eddie sat with his knees drawn up, staring into the coals. The fire had lost its strength, reduced to a dull glow that barely pushed back the dark. I sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat, but far enough to give him space. Neither of us spoke. There are moments when words only get in the way. This was one of them. He rubbed his hands together, then held them over the embers. They were still shaking, though he tried to hide it. I pretended not to notice. A long minute passed, maybe two. I thought it would be louder, he said finally. I nodded. It always is, until it isn't. He swallowed. I thought if I just jumped on, everything would change. I watched the fire settle lower, sparks dying one by one. Sometimes it does, I said. Sometimes it just carries the same trouble to a new place. He let that sit. The night pressed in around us, not threatening, just vast. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. I didn't think I was scared, he said, but I was. That's not a failure, I said. That's sense. He looked up at me then, really looked. You ever get scared? I let out a slow breath. All the time. That surprised him. Then why do you keep going? I thought about that, about all the miles behind me, about the ones still waiting ahead. Because stopping hurts worse. I said. He nodded, like that answer fit somewhere inside him. The fire hissed softly as a log shifted. Shadows danced across Eddie's face, softening the sharp edges of his fear. "I didn't plan on being out here," he said. "It just happened." "That's how it always happens." He glanced at me. "You ever wish you'd gone back?" The question landed heavier than he meant it to. I stared into the embers, watching them crumble into ash. "Sometimes," I said, "but wishing doesn't build a road." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that thought away. The night deepened around us. Somewhere far off, a train horn called lonely, distant, not meant for us. I leaned back on my hands, looking up at the sky. Clouds drifted past the moon, tearing it into pieces and stitching it back together again. "You can stay for a bit," I said. "Rest. We'll figure the rest out in the morning." He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Okay." It wasn't a promise, just an agreement to exist a little longer. That was enough for now. The fire hissed softly as a log shifted. Shadows danced across Eddie's face, softening the sharp edges of his fear. "I didn't plan on being out here," he said. "It just happened." "That's how it always happens." He glanced at me. "You ever wish you'd gone back?" The question landed heavier than he meant it to. I stared into the embers, watching them crumble into ash. "Sometimes," I said, "but wishing doesn't build a road." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that thought away. The night deepened around us. Somewhere far off, a train horn called lonely, distant, not meant for us. I leaned back on my hands, looking up at the sky. Clouds drifted past the moon, tearing it into pieces and stitching it back together again. "You can stay for a bit," I said. "Rest. We'll figure the rest out in the morning." He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Okay." It wasn't a promise, just an agreement to exist a little longer. That was enough for now. The sky began to shift long before the sun showed itself. It wasn't light yet, not really, but the dark had loosened its grip. The kind of in-between hour where the world feels undecided, like it's waiting to see what you'll do before it chooses what comes next. The fire had burned down to a few stubborn coals. I nudged one with a stick, watching it flare briefly before settling again. Eddie sat beside me, knees pulled up, chin resting on his arms. He looked smaller in the half-light, younger. The night had taken something out of him, but it had given something back too, a quiet, steadying weight. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The rails lay ahead, barely visible now, catching the first hint of morning. They looked harmless in the soft light, almost kind. I knew better. "Sun'll be up soon," I said. He nodded. "Yeah." His voice sounded steadier than it had all night. We sat with that for a while. The moment didn't ask for anything else. After a while, Eddie stood and stretched his arms over his head, wincing a little as his joints protested. He looked down the tracks, then back at me. "You always walk alone?" he asked. "Mostly." "Does it ever get easier?" I thought about the question longer than he probably expected. "No," I said, "but you get better at carrying it." He nodded, turning that over in his head. "I don't know where I'm going," he said. "I just know I can't go back." I stood then, brushing dust from my coat. Most of us don't know where we're headed. We just learn which direction feels less like giving up. He looked at me, really looked, like he was trying to measure the road through my eyes. "You going to keep moving?" he asked. I glanced down the line, then back at him. "Yeah." I said. For a while. He exhaled slowly. Me too. The world felt wider in that moment, not safer, not kinder, just wider. We stood there a moment longer, neither of us ready to move first. Then he stepped toward the tracks. I watched him go, every instinct in me wanting to say something, to warn him, to promise something I couldn't keep. But I didn't. Some lessons only take root when they're walked into. He paused once, glancing back over his shoulder. Our eyes met across the space between us. "Thanks," he said. I nodded. That was enough. He turned and started down the line, his figure growing smaller with each step. I waited until he was almost swallowed by the morning before I turned the other way. The world felt different now, not lighter, just changed. I took a breath and started walking. The rails stretched ahead of me, steady and unbothered. They didn't care who walked them or why. They only cared that you kept moving. And as the morning finally broke open around me, I understood something I hadn't before. Some people pass through your life like trains in the night, loud, brief, unforgettable. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they leave you standing still long enough to see where you're really headed.